regular meeting, we'll be hearing presentations of the Board of Selectmen budget. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll begin this meeting with public audience. We invite members to speak for up to 3 minutes. Joan, would you like to speak? And could you give just your could you give your name and address just for the clerk?
The Board of Finance should be the gatekeeper.
Joan?
Joan Code 26, you are so good. Joan Code 26. Now you can start.
26 what?
The Board of Finance should be the gatekeeper for excessive spending. The presentation of the Board of Education budget was approved with little discussion. There were no recommendations for cutting any of the support services for special education that appears to be excessive. The Board of Finance should be aware that 3/4 of the taxpayers are supporting special education funding for a small percent of the student population. The taxpayers should vote no on the budgets until we have an elected officials taking a leadership role instead of becoming the cheerleaders for approving the budgets. A 2.25% increase in $1 million budgets is excessive taxation and should not be approved by the taxpayers. The collection rate as of February is 98.29%. A proposed mill rate of 34.06 places Simsbury in one of the highest tax rating in the surrounding towns. The unintended consequences of this proposed rate hike will stifle all economic development. The business community is affected with high taxes. All the small businesses will have the rents increased, which would affect their bottom line, shuttering the businesses. All the renters in the apartments throughout the town will have their rents increased, which they no longer can absorb. All the assessments will be appealed from the business community as their property value will depreciate with fewer tenants. The homeowners that have remained in their homes for a lengthy time and paid their taxes are burdened with high taxes that make living in Simsbury unaffordable. Over the years, the town has studied the need for the Memorial Park pool with the same results. The cost-benefit analysis does not show a benefit for keeping it open, but it remains in the budget. The taxpayers subsidize Simsbury Farms Revenue Fund with an additional $151,715 year after year with no remedy. The Comfort Dog has $70,000 used from the ARPA fund, is a public relations fiasco that is placing an undue burden on the budget, eliminating needed revenues. The record room needs more help to fulfill FOI requests from the public in a timely manner. The Comfort Dog that is caged most of the time requires a police vehicle that can be placed in the fleet, reducing the cost for a new car. The overtime can be reduced by returning the police officer to patrol. Supporting the volunteer ambulance with hundreds of thousands of dollars is not the responsibility of the taxpayers when AMR is available at no cost. The cost for the town attorney is $171,000. Adding a town attorney as an employee of the town would be cost effective with an additional charge as a grant writer to bring in revenue to the town. Town manager Mark Nelson has proposed a public arts commission to the Charter Revision Commission and usurping the repurposing the Eno Hall for the commission. The Board of Finance should be the gatekeepers, not the cheerleaders for all proposed budgets. The only recourse the taxpayers have to reduce budgets is to vote no. All my comments will be posted on Simsbury Patch and Twitter at Joan Cole. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Joan. Very much appreciated. Is there anyone else from public audience who'd like to speak? Okay. Seeing none, we are here for the presentation by the Board of Selectmen. We have with us first Selectman Max Students and Town Manager Mark Nelson, of course, Amy Merriweather is here, and Melissa Appleby, who worked on the budget, who are available to answer questions for the board. Mr. Burke and Mr. Helfand were not able to attend, but we do have a quorum. We have Art Wallace, who is on Zoom. And if I could ask my members of my board to remind me to look to him sometimes, because I forget that you're there, Art. So you may have to jump in if I don't see you requesting. All right.
I feel gypped that they're not here, that
That was
I'm not a full board here, so I'm sorry.
It was unavoidable. It was just process-wise, this board will be forwarding the budgets without making changes. We'll make changes after the public hearing in April. So this is not, other than to make sure the hearing notice is correct.
Who's that guy? So I'd like to just point out some highlights in the budget message that I sent out today. I'm really proud of the budget that the Board of Selectmen put together for fiscal year 2026. I do want to thank Mark Nelson, our town manager, because he worked hard to reduce the costs of services before passing his budget over to us, taking out around $350,000 in reductions and eliminating a position. And it was evident as we went through our budget that he had already asked all of his staff to make cuts, because when we made cuts, it was just another layer. We spent a couple of nights, one of which was, I think, almost till 10 o'clock, working to make reductions. We did it in 2 phases, and it resulted in $157 plus dollars of expenditure reductions. We voted to include the motor vehicle depreciation schedule on Monday night, so that allowed us to add a little bit to or make up some of the grand list loss that we had. And we also took advantage of the building permits that Mark had included in his budget and bumped it by an extra $1, which will have a public hearing on March 24th. A little highlight on the capital side, the CNR. We started that back in October, doing some ranking of current 2026 projects. Some of us participated in that, but it made it a lot easier when we got to the budget that we didn't have to spend a lot of time last Monday night on the 3rd to go back over the CNR projects, because we had approved them already and we were within funding that we thought was okay to stick with. Our board unanimously approved the budget. We worked collectively to make some hard cuts. We are very thankful for all of the town staff because they were all collaborative and everybody was willing to pitch in. I think we hit pretty much every department, so we'll get to that a little bit later. But I do want to highlight all the things that everyone's tax dollars go to around town. The Flower Bridge, right now, the renovations are happening. We have Clifton Canine, our beautiful dog, who is a town and statewide sensation, and many towns across the state have copied us. Even in other states, they're doing that, and they've seen the value in it, so I just want to highlight that. We have a fully staffed HR department for the staff. And then I'm not gonna keep blabbing here, but it's in the letter, but those are pretty much the highlights. I do wanna call out the Board of Selectmen members that are here, Curtis Looney, Deputy Steve Antonio, Heather Getz, Diana Yeisley, and Kevin Beal, that we really came together as a team and dug in and did what we had to do. And it was just, I have to say the long night was kind of fun getting involved there. So gonna move on from that. Here we are looking nice. Couple things I just wanted to highlight, the goals that we set for 24-25. This is kind of the series of goals that we put together. And we've accomplished a lot of things with Mark's help over this year. We put in place some MOUs for economic development with Main Street Partnership, with the Performing Arts Center. We've implemented ClearGov. Yes, there's a few things that we could do better, but it's a brand new software product, and I feel next year will be better. And I know that Melissa worked really hard to get everything into ClearGov for this year, so thank you, Melissa. I'm a big supporter of it, and I think next year it will be a lot more fun to use. We've put together the housing SHPAC. They're soon to provide us with a advisory that we've asked for, so there will be some movement on the housing front. We have our Charter Revision Commission underway. They're supposed to respond to us by, I believe, August. As I mentioned, the HR department for public safety, we've helped fund the SVAA and have an MOU with them. And then as far as quality of life, one of the things that is obvious is the Flower Bridge. Just again, where we are tonight is the budget presentation to the Board of Finance. We've kind of gone through a lot of other meetings. So just a couple highlights. We have a $29,737,84 town operating budget. It's a 2.95 increase over last year. And we came in with a mill rate of 3301, not including the fire district, which is a 2.32 increase from last year, which is under the COLA of 2.5. And again, that 2.95 increase is under the current inflation rate, which is at 3. The median home value is around a $205 increase. We understand that we've had increases over the last 3 years. We worked as hard as we could to get this down for this year. And then we had minimal grand list growth, and obviously fixed costs, utilities have really gone up this year. So those are some of the impacts. The revenue assumptions, we have the nominal grand list growth, as I mentioned. The tax collection assumption rate is staying at 98.5. We have the ECS cost sharing. We got a little bit more money, I think, than we expected. We have a motor vehicle reimbursement hopefully coming our way, and then the increase in revenues for the building department. And then these are just some of the grand list projections. Thank you, Amy and Francine. And I'm gonna, if you guys wanna do questions after, does that work for you? If you have something you need to just stop me. So this actually I took right out of ClearGov, and you can't really see it, but it tells you how to get to this down below in case anybody needs guidance. I was gonna flip back and forth, but with Art on, I don't wanna have to keep sharing and unsharing. But this is the town operating budget, again, 2.95 for us. The Board of Ed came in at 3.97. And then we did include a $450,000 mill rate relief. I'm using some form of reserves to offset the increase. And then I split this off to another slide because it was so crowded. Again, this is right in ClearGov, and it shows the current mill rate calculation, which I know we will be looking at later with Amy taking the helm on that. And then again, just some of the mill rate history. I think was it 23 was the before the reval, right, Amy? And then we dropped down because of the reval.
Yep.
This does include the fire district, which is currently at 105. It was 1 for a while. And again, the reval year. So this is kind of the handiwork that we did in the 2 meetings. We didn't, with a businessman on the board, no amount was too small to cut. So we really went to work, and as you can see, we've pretty much made a lot of cuts across the board to all the departments. If you want later to ask questions on any of these cuts, you're welcome to. We did cut some of our public agency support that we had. We took out some of the equipment we moved back to CNR. It was moved to operating because it was recurring, but we felt that in this year, if grand list growth is projected higher next year, it would be easier to move it back in to the operating budget, and that would help offset the mill rate this year. So that one of them was the IT item, and also there was a one-time software cost for some new performance management software that we'll be implementing in the new HR department, and that we put back in here too. And then as far as revenues go, we said we have the public hearing increasing the building permit fee from $1 to $2. There's a letter from showing the comparisons to other town, and we're still very low compared to our neighbors, and we don't think it will hurt anybody building and coming to Simsbury. We bumped up the Eno Hall rentals by $2,000 because everyone felt that was a little low. And then, as I mentioned before, we found out that the General Assembly last week, I believe, approved the allowance to use this new depreciation schedule to help us kind of recover some of the motor vehicles due to the MSRP. So we voted to take advantage of that. The public hearing, there's the the veterans exemption, there was a couple changes, so we got a little bit additional value there. We moved a couple of things around, it had a net impact, but the first selectman stipend we moved out of general government back to Board of Selectmen services. And then there was a vehicle that was under general government, but we moved it to planning because it was a planning vehicle after we reduced the amount. And then the CIP, most of this was Mark. We didn't really add a lot to the CIP. We're trying to stay very low on our bonding requests. So these were highlighted as critical items. This is it, basically. And then as you could see, the bonding was at you could see the number, I don't need to read the number, for a total for CIP for this year is 4742.4. But again, most of it's bonded. And then I just wanted to include this slide because of the $10,000 over 2-year, that's the guidance from the Board of Finance, and I wanted to just highlight that we kind of are meeting that guidance. I will say, there's a lot of projects that we have now in unfunded. We did do ranking on CNR this year. We did not get to the CIP project, but that is something that we've all been talking about doing for a long time. So we will have to take a really tough look at what's in the unfunded and what projects are really critical for next year and on. So the CNR, there's a lot of CNR projects, and again, most of these we've been through a few times as a board. We did them in the rankings in October, November. Mark presented it, I think you had it attached in December. Early just as a communications. And then it came in January to the board to look at again. And there were a few small changes that we made. We took a couple things out. We tweaked something at our budget meeting the other night. But we pretty much stuck to them, and we stuck with the 416 traditional payback. And I believe we added another 8 something. It's in here somewhere. So these are all the projects. Again, all these projects, if you go into ClearGov, they're all I know all the CIP items are in there. I'm pretty sure all the CNR items are in there. So you can basically click on each one and see the description. So if you're gonna ask me a question, I'm gonna go to ClearGov, but not right now. Let's see, I'm not clicking. Okay, there we go. Yeah, and so then again, continued CNR projects. And then I just highlighted the capital reserve fund amount that we used, and also the traditional payback as the 2 key figures in the CNR budget. Looking, but it's not going. Why is it not? It's not moving. Okay, there we go. There's everyone's favorite chart. I still think it's confusing, I'm just gonna say it. But the debt service chart shows that we're under the 7% and hopefully will be under the 7%, and that we've moved quite far away from the 8% line. So that's a good thing. And then next steps. So we have public hearing on April 8th. And the rule is it has to happen before April 10th. I did want to point out that we have 2 budget mailers coming out. The first budget mailer will be out on and around April 1st, 1 week in advance of the hearing. And the second budget mailer will come about a week before the referendum, so that we feel like people really need to know what's going on. And that was the best way to do it, and to make sure people get out and vote. I think that's all I have for the presentation. Now, I'm opening up to questions. I could hop over to ClearGov if you guys want to take a peek at some of this over there. I just have to figure out how to get Art over there. Unless you want me to stop and ask questions. You guys are driving, so.
Yeah, well, let's just pause for a sec.
Yep.
One thing I do wanna say is thank you to everyone. We started this process in December, and we were looking at a tax increase at that point of 6.95%. So it's a collaborative process that occurs over multiple months. Congratulations to this board and the Board of Ed who did meet our guidance. It was a very difficult guidance when you start at 6.9 to get it to a 2.5. And that was able to be done by a combination of some extra state money came in, but also hard cuts were made this year. New revenues were added. So I do want to recognize the efforts that went into that. This board is sometimes called the quiet board, but we're actually very active. So a lot of our questions were submitted in advance and answered. And when we ask questions, it's not like a yes or no question. So I do appreciate staff who took the time to answer the questions for us. So we did have a lot of that information in advance. And thank you to members of our board who often sent me the questions, and then I forward them or mentioned them in passing, and they were forwarded to you, and you may have gotten some in addition. So I do want to mention that. I'll take questions on this and then we do have a few updates from Mark. Or Mark, do you wanna just give us the quick updates before we go to questions?
Could we do questions and then
Sure,
circle back?
yes, have you complete, okay. I'll start with members of the board, if there's any follow-up questions to questions we've asked.
I just note that list of decreases. I mean, you know, that for every one that you did there's somebody who's disappointed in it. It was a good long list. And it showed things that we don't wanna cut. Nobody wants to cut, and you did. So I just, when you flash that on there, I could tell that exactly what you said, Chair. There was you did do your work. And that list, I took note of that list. Thank you.
Mike?
No question.
Art?
Yeah, no questions, just echo yours and Art's thoughts just around, I think it's some really tough cuts that went through, but I think the end product is great, so really appreciate the work of the board.
Okay, I have some questions that have been asked and answered by staff, but that I think the public would be interested in, so we'll go through some of those, wanna make sure that they're publicly asked. For the Simsbury Volunteer Ambulance Association, the proposal that I believe is in the budget now is to use opioid funding, a grant, but it's not, we do not have definitive answer on whether we are going to be able, is that an accurate statement?
Since my last update to you, Chair, I got a further email late this afternoon from the town attorney on this, a little bit more positive. They've recommended that we do a 1 or 2 pager about the case, almost like a case study, what the proposal is. The town attorney's had a number of conversations, all of which I would characterize as positive. A little bit of finger pointing because nobody is prepared to say definitively yes until they see that. I'm probably the most confident, but we have a little bit of work to do. We'll have that draft ready probably early next week. I'll quote Mr. DiCrescenzo, who said just today that he thought that this was a trailblazing approach and that it was likely to be approved. So, that was his feedback after conversations informally with the Attorney General's office. He was pointing out to me and reminding me that the AG can't give us legal advice and just referred us back to the town attorney. But there were some conversations. Melissa's also reached out. So we're feeling pretty good about it, and we'll keep you informed.
Can I add?
Plan B, if it doesn't work out, is
Cash reserves.
Yeah.
capital reserves. Okay.
Yeah. A couple items I just wanted to mention, we did update the MOU on Monday night to include a section related to opioid help and Narcan use, and it did come out in the public safety demonstration by the SVAA that they do carry Narcan and they do take care of that, so they do operate on that basis, but we just emphasize that in the MOU to highlight that too.
And just quickly, there's been a lot of public interest on how you measure success. What metrics are you looking at when you evaluate the ambulance investment?
Yeah, I think the number one for me is obviously time on the call and duration of the call, how quickly the vehicle can return to service and continue to serve our residents. I think notwithstanding the effort to deploy opioid settlement funds to fund it, even without that, we had built in some new metrics to the MOU that the board had approved earlier in the year. Measuring time to call, time back in service, and also interestingly, the ins and outs of mutual aid also will give us a sense of our responsiveness and so forth. Excuse me. Along with those changes this year, SVAA is itself being more transparent, putting their metrics on their website, making their annual meeting open to the public, sharing more detail in an annual presentation to our colleagues on the Board of Selectmen. All of those, I think, were improvements. What Wendy was alluding to was a relatively minor change to the language just to emphasize the effort related to opioid and addiction services that they already provided. That was more so that we can include the MOU as a document for that case study that we're preparing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One thing that was mentioned in public audience was memorial pool. And there is a new revenue source coming out of Simsbury Farms Complex, about $90,000, that will be used to pay to keep memorial pool open, since the people who use the pool are fee payers to the county.
Absolutely.
So it's assigning those costs to the people who are paying, so that is now a new revenue to the town. So it is basically self-sustaining at this point.
It is, and you know, we did, no pun intended, but we did take a deep dive with the Board of Selectmen on that and had conversations with a wide range of stakeholders about the issues over there. And of course, as this board knows, what the long-term plan may be. So it didn't result in any negative action in this budget, as you can see, and the extra revenue certainly saves the day. Still some issues for us in terms of the capital plan, what's gonna happen in the next year and the years beyond, and we're signaling that early this year that there's some issues there.
I wanted to give this board an update. I had an opportunity to both speak with Mark, but also with Tom Roy, who is available by phone if we need him. But I did ask him about Aquarian, and he did mention that they have reached a deal with Aquarian, so we will be able to budget for that. He'll work with Amy to get us an addition. There'll be no mill rate impact, but it would avoid us having to do a supplemental appropriation on July 2nd, the day the budget stops, so we can budget that as a grant, a reliable grant. And obviously, if the grant falls through at the last minute, you don't spend the money. But we can take care of that as part of the budget. We had asked the Board of Ed for a list of CNR projects. Do we have any updates on whether we're getting that? Or
Yes, Melissa sent it to me this afternoon and I neglected to send it to you all, so I can do that.
okay, so we will review that at the public hearing. We weren't gonna make a change at this point, but it will probably need to be reviewed also by the Board of Selectmen because they have to recommend it. So if we can start that process along as we go through the evaluation of capital reserves and what amount we wanna do that. I think they were counting on at least the bus being funded, but we need to make sure we go through the process to evaluate that.
So what does that mean as far, it comes back to us, is that what you're saying?
Technically, all capital has to be
Yeah.
recommended by the Board of Selectmen, so we could do it as a post, but we'll have to work that process out, but yes.
I'm not updating my slides. No,
What?
I'm not updating my slides.
No, you don't have to update your slides. Okay. One of the things our board has discussed, and Amy, if you could just remember to sort of, when we get to April 8th, is adding a contingency for capital situations of $100,000 funded by capital reserves, which will not require a supplemental appropriation, but would require you to come to us to release the money. But it would be held against us for the supplemental and the 3% referendum issue in the charter. We had done that in the past, it got dropped last year, we'll just add it back, it helps. Although perhaps the days of getting lots of grants from the federal government are gone, so at least for a little while. I did ask the chief here to come through Mark. Obviously budgets reflect our values. You showed about 850 increase in spending. More than half of that is in the police department, so I just wanted to give the chief an opportunity to speak to that. The biggest obviously was salaries, $270,000, holiday pay, PD overtime, pensions, and then a portion of the health. So that's, between $400,000 and $500,000 of the 850 is going to the police. So if you'd just like to sort of give us a narrative on that.
On the increases in particular?
Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of it had to do with a new contract and general wage increases. There was nothing in initial to cover for next year, so we ended up having a contract that was agreed to. So a significant amount was from there.
Was that 2 years, covering a 2-year gap?
No, actually this is covering no gap. There was just nothing in place for next year. So the contract is almost right on time. It expired in June 30th, 2024. So almost a year,
And it's a 4-year contract.
4-year contract. With an increase in wages comes an increase in some of the other things that affect that, such as overtime. Took a hard look at our overtime and the history of our overtime and where that has gone and where we would like it to go, and the troubles that we've had with staffing. And we feel that the
the original request is where we would be about this year, and we were hoping that's where it would stay at or below for next year. So we are about there, given the small reduction in that, but as I had said at the last meeting, that's not going to affect our response to anything or public safety.
Yeah, Nick, often just on overtime and vacancies, they're related.
They are-
So if you have a big vacancy, your overtime goes up. As you fill the vacancy, you have less need for the overtime. So
does.
we have 2 vacancies. Once those are filled, can we expect the overtime to go down?
So ideally, yes, but no. Because we have had consistently now for 2 or 3 years, 5 to 6 members who have, not the same members necessarily, but have not been able to work. They've been out on extended leave. So we still have those positions. They're not vacancies, but they're not available to work. So we
Is that an unusual amount out on?
So yes and no. Talking to my colleagues, no, it's not. Is it an unusual amount for us? Yes, it is, because we've traditionally had, bits and pieces here. We have averaged about 20% of our patrol workforce not available to work, between vacancies and between extended leave. So that throws that relationship off that you would think is there between overtime and vacancy. When those people return, then what we're hoping for will actually happen. Without going into specifics, some of these are work-related injuries, and some of these are just things that happen to anybody regardless of whether they're a police officer or not. So we've been working to try to get that number more in line with where it was, say, prior to 2020, 2021 maybe. Hopefully we'll be there soon.
Any other questions from members?
5 or 6 out of what number, Chief?
Out of 42.
Out of 42, okay.
So as of today, we have 41 on the books. We have actually 1 vacancy. We had somebody who started yesterday. But out of that number, we have 5 people who are currently not available to work. So mandatory minimums with an event that happened earlier today. We had the entire A squad and additional people inside hold over for our second shift because we had an incident that required a lot of manpower. We had to go to other towns to get support on that, Enfield, Avon, and Bloomfield. So these things happen. Those are the ones that we can tentatively plan for based on things that have happened year over year. Had we known 3 years ago that we would have this amount of people out for an extended period of time, our budgeting probably would have been very different. But overall, it did work out because of the relationship there, because we did have some significant vacancies as well.
And some significant savings returned to the operating budget.
We did, yep.
Zach-
I don't expect that though. We're doing well with hiring. The interest in law enforcement has turned around a little bit. So we have a larger pool to choose from. There are more people who are interested in getting into policing. So we are well on our way to being fully staffed.
Mark, I'd be interested in this board getting updates periodically on the use of overtime
Yeah.
following year, just to monitor that to see that relationship.
Yeah, that's one of the top 3 things we're monitoring. Happy to share it with you, Chair. Just to add to the chief's comments, as part of the collective bargaining agreement, and I know we can get in front of your board in more detail on this, but one of the things on the other side of the equation that is very favorable to the town and to the chief's department generally is the new limit to the amount of time that someone can have their position held due to injury and can actually be out on workers' comp, which was unlimited previous to this new collective bargaining agreement. Also, there were significant changes to how we treat and track sick time, which we're happy to share those details. So I think it does take some time for those 2 key changes to work through because of the 18-month cutoff that exists now and some other things. But as the chief indicated, I think we're almost fully staffed. Is there one vacancy? One vacancy now. So, as the chief has said, It's not dollar for dollar as you fill the position, the OT goes down. My experience, it's been about a fifth, but you can kind of get a measure for that. Just want to emphasize, for the public, the number one driver of OT and PD is the use of accrued time off that we give our employees as part of that contract. So anything we can do through the collective bargaining process to make it a little bit more favorable to the town, we're trying.
Chief, when you call in mutual aid, is the cost of the mutual aid covered by those who provide it, or is there an expense to Simsbury?
It's by those who provide it.
Yeah.
So we reciprocate as well.
I was about to say, so you in your budget provide for the fact that you're going to need to render mutual aid in the course of a year as well?
Yeah, we certainly do.
How does the unlimited time off work when we're also accruing their time off and then in the contract over the next few years changing the amount of reimbursement or funding that they get if they retire or leave in good standing, if I'm remembering the contract correctly? How does that work, right? Because I have unlimited time off. And the reason why my company did that was because now if I leave, I'm not leaving anything behind because they haven't set a number of you get 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. So how does an unlimited number come into a number that accrues on a year over year basis for them to be able to accrue up to 180 days, if I'm remembering correctly? How does that work?
Well,
I was trying to get my head around that while looking at the collective bargaining agreement.
Yeah, it's a great question and hopefully we can spend a little time on it separate.
Sorry.
Not at all. I'll do my best and Chief help me out on this, but you've got to look at those two issues simultaneously, the maximum length that someone could be out before there's a loss of position, for example, and the quote unquote unlimited sick time, which really, to clarify, it's 6 months per event, but we refer to it euphemistically as unlimited sick time, right? I think in the private sector, the analysis swings the other way, where your employer would give you unlimited time in return for, as you said, not giving you any payout when you leave, right? But there is a pivotal point, there's a calculation where the pendulum is swung the other way. And what adds to that is, well, what is the amount of payout and how many years of service do you have to have before you get it? And all of those details that are in the collective bargaining agreement. So for example, if you are gonna be paid out, it would be paid out at a percentage based on other criteria. So it's not dollar for dollar, that's the first thing. The second thing is that you can actually look back and see what your historical usage was of that sick time before you changed it. And it was clear, at least to me, that this was something that worked more favorably to the town if you swing the pendulum this way. So much so, in fact, that we're trying to unify that across all our collective bargaining. The other thing was that there was, to my mind, an equity issue because you had some collective bargaining groups that were benefiting from the so-called unlimited and some that were on the accrual basis where they accrue time in a bank more conventionally. So the idea is pick which one works for the organization and treat all of your employees the same, and we're about halfway towards that goal. Not everybody is on that.
I think if this board would like, Mark has offered to do an executive session on negotiation strategy, which is
Yeah, and just I can say publicly, we are in and we're briefing personal sub of the BOS on Thursday morning, but we are in negotiations now with AFSCME, 3 separate CSEA bargaining groups and dispatch as well. So we're just starting various stages of those and that's ongoing. Those contracts expire all at the same time, June 30th of this year. So we are on track. I think we started the process early and kind of have a good sense of where we're gonna land.
Nick, you are replacing 3 cruisers this year, is that right?
Yes, we are.
So that means we're decommissioning 3?
Yes, right, we are.
So
Yeah.
one question I have is, can we take one of those decommissioned cruisers and use it for planning?
I wouldn't recommend using it for planning, but and I wish Mr. Roy was here because we did have conversations about this in budget and one may be decommissioned for use elsewhere in the organization. But it would not work for planning for a number of reasons.
I can talk with you after on that one. But
Yeah.
one thing, I think if we could try to be a little bit creative in how we refer, so it used to be that Crown Vics were what were decommissioned,
Yes.
but now they're actual vehicles, so they are easier to recommission. So I would just ask you to evaluate that first before you look at a new, and the other question, is planning a new vehicle or a replacement of an existing vehicle?
It's a replacement, and thank you for that question. I neglected, I wanted to get that out there. It's replacing a 2007 Bronco, for lack of a better
Planning
term.
has 3 vehicles,
They have they will have 3 vehicles, that's correct.
and how many people work in planning?
4, well, 3.
It's the building department
It's
too.
the building
The
department.
3 cover planning and building,
5, 6.
Are they shared vehicles?
They are.
I do wanna add that they asked for $44,000 and we lowered it to 30 so they could get a used vehicle or a smaller vehicle.
Recommissioned police vehicles,
Yeah.
5.
I think the only issue I'd point out, Chair, and we did discuss it with the BOS and we'd obviously defer to you, but and thank you to the chief for essentially, because really this was a reallocation. The chief said, I can get by without a vehicle and let's do it. So there was, from that perspective, there was no additional cost. And we wanted to get back to the regular cycle with PD next year. So to that extent, if you reduce it to 30,000, you've created a little bit of a cliff when you go back to PD in the following year. I don't know if I'm saying that in Melissa
Yes.
language, but so there was an attempt made on the administration side to talk our colleagues out of that particular cut, only because the chief was good enough to help us out. But
So that may be one thing our board considers to fill that in. I talked about it with Amy to start to look if there's something so that it's the same amount each year, so we aren't creating the cliff next year. One of our goals has been to get recurring capital into the operating budget when the grand list permits. To Wendy's point, the grand list didn't really permit that this year. But slowly to move it back after the great recession of 2008, perhaps we are now in the new great recession, I don't know yet. But a lot of capital was moved out of the operating budget and put in the capital budget, and we're trying to now do corrective actions. Last year, Lisa, library director, may remember, we took some of the computer terminals that had been moved into capital and shifted them back into the operating budget, $12,000. So I know Melissa did a few of those in the current budget, shifted them back. Which are the ones you shifted back into the operating budget?
well, the ones we shifted back were ultimately put back by the Board of Selectmen, but we tried for the computer replacements, which are recurring. And we tried for the furniture, but that got cut. And the vehicle program, which we have been trying to get as a recurring replacement program. So those were the 3.
And that's the problem with capital, because Wendy is correct, in tough times, those are the first that get moved to an alternate funding source. So totally understandable why you did that, and Wendy has said to me, it's not a cut, it's a delay. And eventually her goal is, the board's goal is to move recurring capital back. It is a very hard thing to do once you've moved it out. We did move some capital out this year too, and that was about 100,000 in public works, is that correct?
Yeah.
And that was put into bonding. So that's one. We'll have to monitor, and as we do that, take a harder look at capital.
Yeah, we moved about 40,000 out.
And to Wendy's point, there is a healthy balance in capital reserves, totally understandable. We were trying to get this budget affordable and below the Board of Finance goal, which was come in below the Social Security cost of living, which this year is 2.5%. The tax increase, we were able to do that. Todd Burke mentioned it's kind of weird because our spending is actually 2.9% increase, but the taxes are 2.5%. And it's sort of hard to explain that to the public, but the taxes are impacted more than just spending. It's about how much money you're getting from the state, what the grand list has done, caps on the grand list. So there are all sorts of factors. So you can end up with the spending increase that's higher than the the mill rate increase or vice versa, depending on those other factors.
We also pulled some really big levers with reserves,
We did.
which is not normal historically, right? We keep going into this bucket and sooner or later that bucket's gonna be empty.
So one of the things we'll be discussing, yes, we, for the public who may not remember, because it's a little boring, last year, we were aware that debt service was gonna spike for 3 years. There's gonna be like a little bubble, and then it returns back to where it was. So we put aside enough capital reserves to cover the 3-year period. So instead of having a tax spike and then a return, to smooth it. And so we'll have relatively steady line item on debt service. So that's about $2.3 million for the plan, is that right? We're using 1.3 this year, 700 next year, and then 300 the year, and then after that it's zero. Start at zero, go through the bump, end at zero. The other thing Mark has proposed and the Board of Selectmen has accepted is using $450,000 of general fund reserves this year for mill rate relief. This board has expressed, I think, a unanimous consensus, although we'll be discussing that tonight and on the 8th, that instead of doing that, because using that 450 creates a cliff, next year it's gone, right? Next year, the legislature is implementing the new MSRP, so we're gonna lose some of that grand list next year. So 2 cliffs next year if that comes to fruition. So this board is considering using, instead of those reserves, health reserves. Our current policy is that if you have reserves in your health fund above 25% of what's recommended by our consultant, that our consultant has recommended you can use up to 1/3 of anything over that to reduce the expenses in the healthcare. And we asked Amy for an analysis, and we'll go through that once we do the budget modeling. The question is, does that create a cliff? And the answer is, we don't know. We thought, we did that last year and thought there would be a cliff. We assigned some dollars in the general fund in anticipation of it, and it didn't create a cliff, so that may or may not create a cliff. It does by using health reserves. We still have enough above where we need to be that we could handle the cliff. One thing with a lot of uncertainty out there, should we lose a lot of money from the federal government, or should we enter a recession or a depression and need to tap reserves? You cannot tap health reserves for other purposes other than health, whereas you can tap general fund reserves. So there is a slight preference to hoard those reserves for an unanticipated event. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Looking at what happened in the stock market the last 2 days and some of the projections out there, I think it's prudent to be cautious with our general fund reserves this year. So would that change the mill rate? No, it's a shift on how we use reserves. It's very technical, but I did want to explain it because the public may have an interest in that. Those are the main questions. I do want to say, the questions that we asked were a lot. The Board of Selectmen had asked a lot of very good questions before we did, and we were, those answers were shared with us, so I want to appreciate all the hard work that happened there. A lot of us do follow what happens on the Board of Education side. A few of us were able to go to their workshop. So there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. I say this is the board that reads. We read everything. And there's a lot of stuff that comes at us very quickly. And a lot of it's numbers, so it can be really boring for some people. Luckily, this board finds it interesting. But they all sort of impact, and this year was just particular. But I want to go back to where we started. We were looking at a 6.9. By using reserves, we got it down to 5.6. By doing reductions, we got it down further. Some state aid came in and got it down further. Some new revenues by the Board of Selectmen got the tax increase lower. So if you think when we started at 6.95 and got to 2.5,
It speaks well for Simsbury.
it speaks well for Simsbury. It speaks well for everyone who worked on this budget, and just want to acknowledge that publicly. I think it's something we can be proud of. But of course, at the end of the day, it's not my budget. It's the people's budget, and we'll hear from them whether they feel that they're getting good value. one thing we hear a lot of is local government is not a business. There's no profit margin in what we do. So the question we ask is, are we getting good value for what we offer? Is this a place where we wanna put our money because we get good value out of it? And that's always the value preposition, not the profit preposition, because there's no profit, or very, very little. All right, so we have all that. And now I'll turn it over to Amy to sort of walk us through the modeling. One of the things we asked Amy to do, there's a new, did you guys shift while you're shipping? New depreciation schedule adopted by the state legislature that sort of impacts not only the grand list, but what residents will pay in car taxes, and we asked Amy to do an analysis of that. It is a super hard analysis, very similar to doing an analysis during a revaluation. Everyone will have different impacts. So I wanna thank Amy and the assessor for working on that. And why don't you start sort of telling us where we are by adopting the new depreciation schedule that the Board of Selectmen did. What does that do to the grand list, and what does that do to car taxes?
You just wanted to start with the levy count?
Sure.
Do you wanna start where we're currently at or just go to the motor vehicle impact?
Why don't you start with where we're at, and can you make that just a little bigger? Thank you.
So this will show you the state of the state. So what Wendy just presented, the town budget, the 29 million, an increase of 2.95. The superintendent's budget consistent with what was previously reviewed. And then again, debt service, same as what was previously reviewed at the 18%.
And before you go down, gross expenditures means the total amount of spending.
Right, so it's all of your expenditures.
So you'll see we're spending way above the rate of inflation, but go on.
So your total for your gross expenditures, the 4.65, and then we go to our revenue offsets. We're expecting revenue of about just a little over 16 million with the Board of Selectmen adjustments. The use of reserves of 450,000. So total anticipated revenue, if you will, of 16,700,000 or an increase of 18.75%.
Amy, in that 16 million is included the use of capital reserves, the 1.3 million for the debt
All
service
revenue
spike.
sources, yep.
So that does include some of our reserves, but you have pulled out the 450 reserves in general fund, so not all the reserves, right?
No, this has all the revenues. This
Revenues.
reserves are documented separately. So the revenues have all transfers, incoming, state funding, everything. It does not include the use of reserves, and then we have the use of reserves, like you call it, to get to your total revenue.
The use of reserves is in that 16 million, right?
For debt service,
For debt service?
2.3.
The 16.2, it's not included. You add the 450 and then it's included, so you get to the 16.7, which
Where is
includes
the
reserves.
1.3 million in capital reserves?
That's part of the 16, that's a transfer, so that's part of the 16.2.
Okay, that's what I,
We're saying the same
yeah,
thing.
okay.
So you take your gross expenditures and subtract out any revenues that you're anticipated to receive. You get to your net expenditures, which is what we tax for. So about 111 million, or an increase last year of 2.83%.
So even though our spending is 465, what we're taxing for is 283. That was Wendy's point. Inflation is currently at 3.2, so this is coming in below inflation. and the taxes, even though the net spending is 2.8, the taxes go down to 2.3. Can you show us go down below what that looks like?
So this is what Lisa just walked you through with the mill rate at the 2.32%.
Okay, and now you wanna go into sort of what's changed with the new schedule that the Board of Selectmen adopted and how we got there and how that helped us.
So before we do that, can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Cause I'm just thinking about, and I think you guys are sort of getting to the answer to my question, cause when I think about the Board of Selectmen budget and its increase in the Board of Ed budget, if you average those two out, you would have expected our mill rate to have gone up a lot more than it did. So the things that offset it from a revenue perspective, and I think this is where all the reserves and everything else come into play, how durable is that? Right, because on the one hand, it's like it's nice to say that the mill rate is going up by less than inflation, right? I mean, that's a target that we've had and we've seen a very nice progression over the last 3 years. So it's a good result at the bottom line, but I'm just wondering, like, is something getting hidden because the expenditures are actually going up at a higher clip than that? And the things that we're using to offset, are those gonna always be there, or is there other belt tightening that's gonna be needed to really stay on a path of like 232 going forward, if you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. I think that the debt service spike is temporary and that will go away. We start at 0 and we're gonna go to 0. And just as a reminder to the public, we already have paid for that. It's not dependent on future boards, it's not dependent on future revenues. We put money aside in the capital reserve. We have a plan. So while we go through that, the 1.3, it does not create a cliff. It's used for a purpose. We put the money aside for the purpose. Once the purpose serves, it goes away. So that does not. And now that we've limited long-term bonding, that should not be a problem going forward unless the needs grow and we need to reconsider that. The 450 does create a cliff, and that is probably my biggest problem with the budget, which is why we'll be looking at using the health reserves. But to your point, the spending is exceeding projected grand list growth, so that is gonna be a little bit of a problem. Amy, Amy, could you go to projections of grand list and are those hidden? Can you do the out years, what the mill rate looks like?
To do the other one for the out years, this one just has current year.
I'm always telling Amy to hide the out columns and now I'm telling her to open them up. So that is a little different. Are those new grand list numbers?
Yes.
So that's based on what I sent you this afternoon.
No, I have not seen those.
Okay, so that is based on, George put together a listing of major construction projects, the anticipated progress. Francine did values associated with those, cause you wanted to see how close we could get to actuals that we can actually count on for fiscal year 27. So her real estate number was updated here. It's just 20 million less than what was anticipated previously. I think this is conservative, but this is what we can reasonably count on based on what's in progress, the status of the progress, and where Francine thinks that we'll land by the end of fiscal year 27. Since it's only the big projects, there is more room in there for additional, but it also does leave us room for any possible legislative changes or anything. So this is a conservative estimate for fiscal year 27.
So that is down from our initial projections of about a 1.3%, 1.5% increase in the grand list. So it's about half of what we were expected. Part of the rationale for using the 450 is it's okay, next year's grand list is gonna be great. This tells us it's not, so to Art's point, it is a matter of concern, and it will probably be the most talked about issue for this board in April, what we can do to get rid of that 450. And we'll look at all sorts of options and ask Amy to give some thought to that. But if you go down to the tax increase below that, Amy, what does that mean for tax increases looking in the out years?
It is.
At least before we leave the that topic though, it seems to me by taking the 1/3 of the differential on the health reserves, if I'm understanding that right, that becomes its own sort of like smoothing mechanism, right? Because then the next year you can take another third, right? And you're taking a third of a smaller amount.
Yes.
So you could theoretically keep doing that. Granted, you don't want to have to keep going to that well, so you maybe would only want to project that you're doing that for another year or two. I don't even know, right? But the good side is I think there is a natural smoothing mechanism by not taking the whole thing at once or using some other formula. So I like the formula that we have because I think it does create some level of smoothing, but we should probably just model that out and make sure we're comfortable with it.
Absolutely.
And if I can add, Chair, on the one of the reasons this number dropped from the one that you had seen earlier was the methodology that we did with Francine was we actually assigned a percentage probability that it would be online. Whereas the initial analysis was this is in the pipeline, it's gonna be online. So this is a better, much more conservative and I would argue accurate assessment. We're confident that the numbers will be higher. We wanted to shoot a little bit lower because of this. Obviously, so much depends on what our future grant list growth is and the Board of Selectmen have made economic development their number one goal.
Thank you, and we appreciate giving the analysis that was done because we do know it's a hard analysis to do. It requires multiple departments.
And Amy shared it with the full board. You've got the actual spreadsheets. You can see which project is what the percentages we assign to it, and I think you'll be pleased with that.
Okay, thank you. We really appreciate that. That is one of the things we asked Mark to provide, and he was able to do that. So thank you. We'll review that. But to Art's point, if you could start to look at the tax increases. Amy, those actually are better than what we had before. Does that include the state reinstituting the depreciation?
So that has all of Francine's updated projections based on what she thinks is gonna happen with the motor vehicle.
Amy, how did we go so dramatically from a 4 to 2.3 from the last presentation that we had?
From a 4?
Yeah, for next year, we were looking at 4%.
Maybe at the beginning when we did our initial fixed costs, but that had always been coming down. I think at one point, the fiscal year 27 or 28 was like a 1% at one point.
I was looking at the one from
I need to see what
3,
model
4.
we're looking at.
I don't know. Okay, so the last model you had, I must have the wrong one. But can you explain, if you go back up, what sort of budget increases are you assuming?
Sure. So for the town operating budget, we did a 3% increase, a 3% increase for the Board of Education budget. And then the debt service is based on actual debt payments that we calculate using an amortization schedule based on the issuances we've already done, the debt we already have, and then the projected amortization schedules for the debt that we are going to be issuing in the out years. And this gives us our estimated debt service payments. And then for fiscal year 26, as Lisa mentioned, we had built in the use of capital reserves to offset the cost. And then again in fiscal year 27, we're using $700,000 to reduce this expenditure, and then $300,000 to reduce the debt service in fiscal year 28. And then in fiscal year 29, we'll be pretty much flat, so we will not have to utilize reserves to get that down anymore. And then on the anticipated revenue, we kept this pretty consistent from year to year. The only thing that I changed in here was the calculation of the motor vehicle reimbursement that we can anticipate from the state based on the meal rate cap.
Amy, if you switch the Board of Ed assumption to 4, which is what they have more likely been doing, show how that changes everything going down the line.
All the way
Someday it
up.
would be amazing to have a 0 in there again. It's happened before, under your watch.
Yes, multiple times. And now, If we go down, what does that do to the tax increase? Okay, something's wrong.
I deleted it. Oh, the number lock's not on, hold on. Just kidding. There we go.
So we start to get into the higher twos and threes.
Increases at about 1%.
So the question is, will we have to hear from the public whether that's an acceptable increase? Cause those are cumulative year after year after year. There are some towns that say, you should live within your means, whatever the grand list growth is, that's what you get. There are some who think that the investment in our community is worth it and they're willing to pay a little more. We'll be watching what inflation does over the next few years, but it's gonna be really important to hear from the public. And the question is, the Board of Selectmen is gonna be hard pressed to come in at 3 every year.
Chair, I have a question if I may.
Yeah.
So in the analysis, in the out years, is there, maybe for Amy, any factoring in of the increase in property values over those years? So,
No,
Plus I
there's
know
no
it's every
reval
5
impact in
years,
there.
yeah.
right, but it, so the next reval is
29.
29, okay. Thank you.
That will be interesting to just see
Right, yeah.
what happens in that year. One of the things we are charged with doing is making sure that we come in within the municipal cap. Amy has informed us that we have, but Amy, for the record, does this budget come in below the
It does.
municipal cap? And then why is that important? Why do we care?
It impacts our state funding, so for every 0.5% or percent, I can't remember which one it is, that we go over, they reduce our state funding. And then there's certain municipal revenue sharing we wouldn't be eligible for.
Amy, can you walk us through now health reserves, what we have and how what that might look like for our consideration in April?
So this is just a page from the quarterly report, the last quarterly report that we did, where we have our, oh, that's small, hold on.
Thank you.
Yeah, I looked up. We have our July 1st fund balance. We have an anticipated surplus deficit for this year to get to our revised fund balance of 4.5. We have an IBNR incurred but not reported liability for $898,000. This brings you your total reserves. This is where we plan on ending fiscal year 25, where our percent of claims is 35% of claims, and that's the number that our advisors tells us we should be 20 to 25% of expected claims. So if we have 35% at the end of fiscal year 25, bring us down here. The use of total reserves is that 5.5. If we used 1.5 million of it, this would get us to the 25% of expected claims, but since we don't want to use all of it, we only want to use a third of it. This would be 450,000. The Board of Education has already committed to 100,000, so that would only leave us 350,000 for the town to use. So we'd be about $100,000 short of that $450,000 target unless the Board of Finance is comfortable using the full 450.
If we use the 450, what would that leave the reserves at? That would be at 20, instead of 25, it would be at 23, 20.
So if we just used another, we'd still be at about 24.
Okay. So that's one possibility. Amy, one of the things we have not yet unassigned, we have put money aside anticipating a cliff this year, cause we did use health reserves, we still have 850 in the general fund reserve for a cliff, which is a pool of money that we may not use this year, but looking at the out years and the grand list projections and some of the needs of the town, if we don't need it for health, could then be released to fund some of the capital needs or other needs. It would be for one-time funding, not for recurring funding, but that would be another bucket that we can look at. One of the things we had discussed is this year, capital reserves were relatively large. For the public, what capital reserves are, at the end of every year, we look at how much did departments save, did they not spend, and did we get extra revenue, and that's called positive surplus. We had an unusually large positive surplus this last year because income came in very, very strong, about $2 million. We got an unanticipated grant from the state, about $700,000, so $2.7 million that could not have been reasonably budgeted at the time we did the budgeting with the information we had. The state actually told us not to budget for that grant. We had Amy call Martin Heft, and Martin Heft told Amy, do not budget for that. I can't promise you you're gonna get it. So we did everything we could, and then the interest all across, if you look at towns across the state, they had the same unanticipated when we do our budgeting. The estimates really start coming December for the budget that comes, so it's almost a year and a half in advance, so it's very hard to project what's gonna happen in the economy. But when that happens, it's not an overtax because it's a closed system. That money then gets put aside and it gets deployed in the following year, which saves taxes. So it gets carried forward. It's tax me now or tax me later. You still need to spend the money, so that money then gets put towards the taxpayer to reduce taxes. It's a closed system. It cycles through. It's a little bit complicated, but that's how we've been using it. But those numbers are now going to be much lower because we are actually reducing the interest investment income from 4.2 to 3.75% assumption, is that right? Which means we're not gonna have that huge amount of excess. We've been told by the state, if anyone's following their budget process, the governor just told departments to cut. There's not gonna be extra money coming in from the state. I'm very grateful that we got the extra excess cost because they don't actually have the money to do that. And so we're gonna be in a little bit of a dearth period, I think. And so we'll have to plan out, and one of the things we'll be asking Amy is to come up with a plan of how much capital reserve should we use, anticipating that our tax collection assumption rate will bring in some, but it varies. The tax collection assumption rate is sort of a revenue cap saying, hey, don't budget too close to the margin because your expenditures could be a little. And the worst thing you can do for a rating agency perspective is to come in over budget. So that gives you the smoothing. There's extra money, guess what? It gets paid to the taxpayer the following year. So we'll ask Amy to sort of come up with a plan with the anticipated year-end surplus so that we can give some guidance to Mark and the other boards as what they can anticipate for capital reserves use over the next few years. And it's gonna be less than probably everyone wants. But we'll sort of work on that. So that's the health reserves. We'll have the plan, we'll have the discussion on that on April. Does anyone have any concerns at this point that they want Amy to look into further on using the full 450? And to Art's point, it sort of gets us naturally down on the use of reserves and it frees up the use of general fund reserves should we face. At this point, can I say I don't know that it's unanticipated. Perhaps there's such huge uncertainty out there that it is wise to make sure that we keep as much flexibility in the general fund. Is there anything we want Amy to look at beyond that?
Not for me.
Okay. Amy, could you show us some capital reserves, what we have in that fund?
And just let me share it for Art. Sorry, Art. So this is our current unassigned balance is about 4.6 million. The town manager's proposed budget anticipates using 883,000. This gets us to a revised balance of 3.7. And then we did approve the Two Farms Village Road purchase for about $1 million. This will leave us about 2.7 million.
The one thing we do not have yet is the recommendation from the Board of Education on use of capital reserves, so that may be reduced further depending on what they propose and what the Board of Selectmen recommends on that. So that brings us down, this board has talked about putting aside 100,000 appropriation there for a contingency to be released upon request to us when they wanna do that. And then that would still leave maybe 2 million, maybe, I don't know.
I'd probably be high ones. If I were to guess, I think Board of Ed was 1.3.
That's seven,
That's
but
above
part
the
of that was
550, so about 8, yeah,
about
800, and then your 100, so it'd probably be 1.718.
171, if we fund the full
Right.
amount. We did ask Matt to come in and prioritize those, so that will be part of the discussion there. And then we can anticipate if the tax collection assumption rate comes in within a normal range, 6 to 900,000 will be added to deploy in future years. But we did have one year when it only gave 100,000. Do we have any indication of how tax collections are going?
They're going well. The last projections I gave you, I think that we were gonna be about $1 million to the good, and I think that still stands.
One of the things, Amy, we had talked about, we have the budget hearing on the 8th. It's usually very difficult, almost impossible to get the quarterly done. Is there any chance the quarterly will be done by then?
I mean, I can probably do it through February instead of doing it through March. But by the time all of the revenues come into the department, it's like the 4th or the 5th, and it just doesn't give us enough time.
So we had planned on doing a separate hearing, so we'll just keep that on the books so that I'd rather it be accurate and up to date, to make sure, especially this year where there's so much change, so we'll just keep that second hearing on the books. I had spoken to Mark, Melissa, when you get the draft bond resolutions, if you could get those to us as soon as you get them so that we have time to read them. I'd asked Mark for a copy of the hearing flyer before it's sent out, and Mark was gonna make sure that's circulated not only to the Board of Selectmen, but also to our board. The grand list analysis we got, thank you. What update I wanted to ask both Amy and Mark on, where are we with the fire district issue and their receipt of the motor vehicle reimbursement?
Was that today or yesterday, their board meeting?
Their board meeting was yesterday. I reached out to them for an update. I have not heard back.
Get that if you could just share where we are with that. And then if we could get a list of abatements and exemptions that Mark said that Francine is working on that.
That is in your email along with the project listing that Mark that we took you through.
The email I have not seen, okay.
Right, yeah, it's in there.
Excellent, thank you. So I think those are all the requests we had. Is there anything else from Mark or Wendy?
Well, we're sitting here and I know I just checked out the email from the Board of Ed on these CNR requests. Is that something we could just take a quick look at since we're all here? Or is that inappropriate?
The email came in at 6:15.
I have not seen it.
It's not on our agenda, but
I guess
it's
my question,
related.
so can I just ask a question about that? What is their funding level that they normally get?
550, 300,
Okay, so they're asking for an additional
like
$850,000 that's gonna come to us to prioritize, I guess.
So, but remember, capital reserves is for both the town and the board.
No, I agree,
Yeah.
I understand, but obviously we prioritize, we need to know what the priorities are for these items.
Right.
Okay, so we'll get that on our agenda and have Board of Ed present.
Okay, so we'll get that moving. And we do have some flexibility there because we're doing the second hearing so that there will be time to do all that. In terms of our things, you do have before you, this is the second reading of the draft letter for the annual report. Were there any changes to that? It's from all of us. Okay, so Amy, if you could just make sure the numbers are accurate and then pass that along to the town manager, and we're still on target for getting the annual report out at the end of March.
Yes.
Then I sent a draft letter to folks in the past. We have posted a letter after we send the budgets on to hearing on the website. Sometimes that goes out on listserv. I wasn't sure if the board members had an interest in doing that again this year. It's a very simple letter, just says where we are. Todd did get feedback from Todd and he thought we should add a sentence, and I'm hoping Amy will help draft that sentence on why it is the tax levy is different than the tax increase, and sort of explain that to the public, because it is a super complicated issue and we use crazy terms that are very complicated. The tax levy, just again for members of the public who may not be eating and drinking this as we are, it's the amount that you tax for. It's different than what you spend for. Because we get other revenues from the state, from fees, from other sources other than taxes. But the tax levy is what impacts the mill rate. Okay, so if Amy, if you could give some thought to
I'll
that.
draft something for you.
Okay. And then we'll have Amy circulate it and we'll post it as soon as she's ready. If we can do that before the end of the week, that would be great. Okay. And are we ready to approve the hearing notice?
I read it and I liked it.
Okay, one of the things I did wanna thank Melissa for, we many months ago met with council about how to show capital reserves, not only in the referendum questions, but in the hearing notice, and you did add a section I saw at the very end where you show capital non-recurring, showing the 415 payback plus the capital reserve section as well. So thank you for doing that. One of the things we will see in referendum questions is we had talked about changing the referendum questions. I don't know what those are gonna look like or where that ended up. I included debt service in the Board of Selectmen budget. Is that still the plan, or?
Yeah, we need to circle back on that. It's been a long time since we
So-
so yeah, we'll talk about it.
And just get that to us early so we have time to review that as well. And I'll call you on some of the motions, if we could just review those motions. Okay, so that said, we have this, everyone has had an opportunity to read the draft hearing notice. Okay, may I have a motion to approve the draft hearing notice for the Board of Finance public hearing on Tuesday, April 8th, 2025 at 6 p.m. at the Simsbury Public Library, telephone room 725 Hot Meadow Street, Simsbury.
So move.
I'll second it.
Chair, can I ask one question?
Of course.
And I might have missed something in the details of the back and forth in the room there, but it mentions, if I'm looking at the right letter, it mentions 225 as the increase. Is that right in the letter? Do you see that?
Oh, we're doing the hearing notice first? Can we,
Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
we can go back to the letter in a sec, yeah.
Okay,
Can we do the hearing notice? Do you have any issues with the hearing notice? Can you see that?
I do, yes, I can see that one. Sorry.
That's okay. Alright, we have a motion, we have a second, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, going back
Aye.
to the letter, Art, where are you, which letter are you referring to? The letter that we'll post online?
Yes,
Okay. What is your
and
question?
my only question was, it just says 225 is the increase, and I thought we were just looking at a spreadsheet that I wanna say it said 232.
The 225 includes the fire district.
Okay, that was the small change from that.
We can update it.
Yeah, I have it, you'll see there's a footnote. But that's a fair question.
As long as it all foots, I that's all that I cared about. I was just remembering the 232.
No, that makes sense. It's complicated because of the fire district. Even the state forgets we have a fire district. So obviously this letter would be approved subject to Amy checking the numbers and making sure that they're accurate, which is always a good sign, and adding the one sentence for Todd Burke. Once that's good to go, we'll go ahead and post that without objection. Okay. And the annual report without objection, that's good to go as well, subject to Amy's review of the numbers, make sure we have the numbers accurate. Okay. All right. We have before us, I think the last thing then is review of the minutes, March 4th, 2025. I had submitted to Amy and shared with all members suggested edits. If everyone had a chance to see them, Amy has incorporated them. There were no substantive changes, they were just grammatical and stuff like that. That may I have a motion to approve the minutes of March 4th, 2025 regular meeting
I'll make that motion, and that's with your edits,
with
correct?
my edits. Yes, thank you.
That motion.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The motion carries unanimously. Is there anything else for the good of the order before we adjourn? Amy, did I forget anything that we need to do? Mark or Wendy?
Thank you, Chair, nothing here.
May I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, everyone.
Years, SCM has been the voice of our town,
bringing us together through local programming,
education, and live broadcasts.
SEM isn't just about television.
It's about empowering our community,
ensuring our voices are heard during government meetings, and celebrating milestones
like our high school graduations.
But today, SEM faces a challenge.
Our funding structure is based on television subscriptions.
And it's no secret, people have been cutting the cord.
With a shift to internet-only subscriptions,
SEM receives less revenue,
even though all our programming is freely available online.
We need your support.
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 Your donation can make a difference.
It will ensure that SCM remains open,
continues to educate our youth,
and keeps our community informed.
Thanks to SEM, I've been honing my creative skills, helping me work towards my college degree.
SCM is crucial for keeping our community connected.
SCM isn't just here to broadcast local events. They're actually preserving Simsbury's history.
Join us.
Join us in preserving Simsbury's voice.
Simsbury's voice.
Together we can ensure that SCM continues to thrive
for generations to come.
Visit our website
Or scan the QR code on your screen to make your donation.
Every contribution
Counts.
Thank you for supporting Simsbury Community Media,
where your town,
Your schools,
And your government
come together.